Welcome to the podcast where we take a deep dive into the stories behind construction business leaders. We will share how they got started, how they found success, and the lessons learned along the way. I'm your host, Eric Fortenberry. Welcome to Builder Stories. Welcome back, everybody. Today I am here with James Moylan. He is the owner of Design Builders. They are located in Bethesda, Maryland, right outside of DC. James has been doing outdoor living, is actually kind of niched down a little bit. He's going to tell us more about that, but really excited to have you on the show. Welcome to Builder Stories, James.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so why don't you give us a little bit of background? I mean, who are you? How did you get into building, and kind of what does your company do?
So I started Design Builders in 2006. So we're coming up kind of crazy. Next year will be 20 years. I had a guy in my neighborhood who run a deck building company, and I was the 12-year-old sweeping up the job sites on the weekends in the summertime. I went to school for business administration, and when I wrapped up, I went back right to work for the company, looking for a job, and kind of got sucked in, and worked my way up for a year or so. Then got my contractor's license, started to do subcontracting, and then from there, just invested everything we made into our website and marketing. To try to grow our company.
That's awesome. So you it sounds like you sort of grew up, just being exposed to, construction, and that kind of led to that lifelong interest, I guess. Do you feel like kind of going through, college and getting that degree? I mean, like, has that been really helpful for you as a business owner?
I think so. When I started the company, I got the help of one of my accounting professors. And kind of, it was my last year. I'd started to really kind of think in it. So the last year in school, everything I did kind of had a little bit of, how can I use this to start a business? So there wasn't one little thing or this, that, or the other, but it was just kind of a general knowledge and stuff that, stuff that we run into. But from the flip side, doing all the work, I did all the installs for the first 4 or 5 years. All that knowledge, I think was absolutely invaluable as well.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, it's kind of seems like a pretty big debate sometimes. Is that college degree like really helpful these days? I see so many people who they literally just kind of grow up in the trades, running the business, sort of just naturally progress. And obviously, you got to sort of learn trial by fire, and experience. I think ultimately is the number one thing that will help prepare you and help get you ready to go. But obviously, as entrepreneurs, we know that, sometimes we just got to figure it out as we go. So, I think it's great that you did have that background. I found it really interesting though, that you talked about, like, one of the first things that you did is getting your website and your marketing set up. A lot of times people don't really understand, the importance of marketing, and even kind of can get a little confused about the difference between sales and marketing, and how unique those roles actually are. Tell us, how did you get the website going? I mean, did you figure it out yourself? Did you hire someone? What led to that?
That was always kind of the goal. To me, you have to have sales. And it's kind of a thing we continue to say, like, the most important thing is sales and marketing. You don't have work, you don't have a job. So that was always pretty clear in the beginning, and why we made it such a focus. Initially, I hired a company to build out a web page, and they took care of like the SEO when it was still a new thing, and ultimately we got away from that, and we just started to learn the different mechanics of what they were doing, and started to outsource stuff to different people to handle different pieces. Handle YouTube, handle Twitter when it was Twitter, and Facebook, and but most of the stuff we did was build out our blogs and build out content. Which is kind of similar to what you're doing now. So our entire marketing strategy was just to contact people in the industry, your Trexes, your TimberTechs, your Danbury Cabinets, and create relationships with their marketing departments. Learn about them. We would set up a meeting like this, a Zoom meeting, and interview them. It would help us learn about their products. So it would help our sales team. We would record the meetings, and then our marketing team would take it and slice it and dice it, turn it into blogs, turn it into PDFs, turn it into call to actions for our website. And just take that and put it all over the place. And having, after 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, the website exploded.
And that's that's so smart, man. Like, being able to kind of, leverage those other brands, and get their name on your website, in your content, so that when other people are searching, they're in your area. I mean, it reminds me of, something that I read about in, Marcus Sheridan's book, The Ask You Answer. Don't know if you've read that book. It's like one of my all-time favorites. Highly recommend it. But, he talked about how when he built the River Pools brand, he started, basically just creating all these blogs about, all of the different players in the space, even in his local market. Like he would have blogs about, all of the competition, and so like it was interesting because, people would think, man, like there's no way I want to publish a list of all my competitors, in my area. But like what he found is that when people were searching for any one of those companies,
They'll
they ended up
find me.
landing on his blog post, where obviously there was, something about, river pools, but, they would kind of drill in, and like now they're learning all about them, even though they got, they led to their site through those keywords and the SEO and the content. So, it sounds like you had a really good handle on the
Was that the guy
value.
that called himself the Lion or something like that?
I'm not sure. I hadn't heard that, but
I think I'm familiar with that company, and in the early stages was something that we tried to emulate a little
oh
bit.
yeah, that would make sense. I mean, again, he really has set the standard, and I think, even what I learned, and actually had a conversation with him recently. Like, we used to have, like, all of this content that we created, and we recorded, these meetings with our, with our customers, telling them about all the updates and everything that was happening. But like we kept it like closed, just for the customers. And, in his book, and when I heard him speak, he was talking about how, like, the importance of, opening up and making the best decisions for what's best for your prospects in the market. And if you're making decisions, because you're scared of your competition and you want to hide things from them, well, ultimately that's, that's you're doing a disservice to everyone else, and the people who are trying to learn about you and find you,
I sure.
they're not able to. So, we end up just opening everything up. We have, like, I think almost 500 videos on YouTube now, and it's been a tremendous help for us, to have that out there. I'm curious to learn how, you mentioned YouTube and videos. How have you guys leveraged, videos?
Well, it's funny. So the guy that runs my marketing program, his name's Tim. He's fantastic. When I first started, again, when I was kind of banging nails and looking for efficiencies, like what can I do to make this thing work? I got a cold call from Tim, and he said, "Hey, I'm a videographer. I do this, that, and the other. Is there any way that I can help your business?" And this was, I think, 2008. And I said, "Yeah." I was like, "I've been looking for a videographer." And back then, my plan and my goal was to make a video so that when I went to a job site, I could put it in my laptop on a DVD and explain the entire company, the entire sales process. The customer could look at it. They would see me talking, explain the whole process. I would be on the back, take our pictures, take the measurements. So by the time that I got in, no small talk. They knew exactly how we operated, what we would do. And we used a program. I can't even remember what it was called. It was a super simple deck drawing program. And we would sit down there and start to draw the program with them. And what we do is super custom. It was never a kind of one-time sale, but the idea was to kind of get them locked in on us being the authority, being the most efficient, being the easiest to work with, to try to grow out and get the sale. That evolved into YouTube's. It's one of my biggest regrets. We stopped. We did not put more into our YouTube channel. We probably have 50 or 60 videos out there, but they're all from like 2009 to probably like 2015 or 2016. And we didn't quite get like what YouTube was going to be. We just saw it as a way to, showcase everything we did, so we would take our blogs and make a video out of it. The best way is to plan out a sunroom. The best way is to plan out a deck, how to use an outdoor kitchen. Some of the different companies that we would work with, like Danver, for example, we would go to their headquarters, and do video of how to do the installs, and then just put videos out all through the internet of how to do the install, how to do the install. They actually used it for a lot of their vendors. They would use our videos, send them out. And again, like you said, it's good information, to get out there. We very much believe in helping the community, the deck builder area. I mean, it's a bunch of kind of smaller companies. There's not a ton of behemoths in it. So, all the good folks have a pretty good idea of the other good folks in the industry. And it's nice to share knowledge, and it's nice to kind of to grow together and see the stuff that people are building. Cause like I said, before we got online, we used to build grandma's screen porch that you would think of, and now it's an outdoor living room, that families spend, time in, and special occasions. So it's pretty cool to do.
Yeah, and it's, have you it sounds like you put a lot of focus on educating, your customers, like, going into it and about what it's like. I mean, has that helped sort of, warm up the leads for you, and ultimately it sounds like it kind of has created that awareness and sort of started to build the relationship, whether it be, from your website or from videos that they found. I mean, how would you say that has impacted your ability to close them?
I mean, our number one thing we do is educate the client. I just had someone yesterday call it in. We did our meeting. I'll explain kind of how we do that in a second. They had just moved into the house 2 months ago. And I said, look, man, I'll tell you what I would do. You need to call me back next year. You need to live in your house. You need to know where the sunlight comes in. You need to know what you're going to do in the backyard. You need to know what that July 4th party looks like. If you build a deck or outdoor space right now, 2 months, you're gonna screw the whole thing up. So for us, even if we're losing business, we're educating the people and then hope, that'll just kind of pay it forward down the line. I can't tell you how many times we've had those meetings with people. We don't get the job, but they go out and they talk about how great it was to do the estimate process with us, and we've gotten business from that. So that's really our number one thing, is just explain, educate, and really, to me, that's what sales is.
I love hearing that. I mean, I wholeheartedly believe too. It's being transparent, honest. Do what is best for the customer at all times, and that reputation, will that will precede you. That will come back, tenfold over by people sharing that experience. And it's like, even if they didn't go through with it, even if they didn't do it, like that experience that you gave them by being a contractor that they can trust, who shot them straight instead of just coming in with the high pressure sale. I mean, that really is so valuable. And, as people want to try to sell, larger jobs, more, the design build, especially more thought out, like, hey, this isn't just like we're going to come in here and, do this quick job and you're going to be up and gone. Like, I mean, this is a transformation of their home, and this will affect their lifestyle and it will cost them. But, I think being able to have that mindset is very, very powerful.
That's right. That's correct. Our like the way that we do our sales. I mean, our very first meeting we hold it's an online design consult. And it's free. We in the ways before we had charged, but what we found is it's just better to do it is a free service. And instead of charging people, we qualify them by making them send in 10 pictures of their house and their property plat.
Mm.
So to me, if someone can go through that, they don't need to pay me. They're a serious customer. They're going to go out, take 10 pictures, answer the survey that we send out so that we can give them good information and send in their property plat. Then I'm happy to talk with anybody. And in our initial meeting, it's online just like this. And we get into the weeds. I mean, we talk, I look at their project before, so we have an idea of what they're thinking about and what they're doing. And we just give them ideas. We say, hey, have you thought about doing it over here? What about thinking about doing it over here? Or what about this? And we pull up our portfolio and we pull up the different brands, and it's just an education system. So we don't go into people's house and do the small talk and have that awkward 10, 15 minutes that nobody likes. And, you're out there and you talk, you leave and you can't remember what you spoke about. We have a solid hour of good conversation, deep conversation, answering really pointed questions. Everything's documented, and then we take, from there, we'll go to our design service and estimate service after that consultation.
That's awesome. So it's, kind of a Zoom meeting up front, no charge, but it sounds like after that, kind of once you've kind of figured out, hey, this is what it sounds like you'd be interested in, is that next step, is there a charge for the design and the estimate?
We don't we found that if we get to that stage, our close rate's about 80%.
Okay.
So we just need to get them to that next meeting. And they'll do the job with us. And then in that next meeting, it's online again. And we have an estimate and a design. So we start the meeting, take everything what we spoke about, have a design, pull it up. It's not meant to be perfect, but at least it's, pencil to paper. They have an idea of what they're looking at. And we give them a detailed estimate. And then that is a detailed walkthrough, education wise, on what the estimate is. Why you have this, why you have this. You can do it this ways. And there's 3 different ways to do it. You can use this material, you can use that material. Sometimes it's better to do this, sometimes it's better to do that. And ultimately trying to figure out what is going to be best for them. What are their very, very, very specific needs that we can try to solve. And try to make it a good space that they're going to use as much as absolutely possible.
Yeah, that's
And then
that's
from
great.
there, if everything looks good, then, we'll do an on-site visit next, just as a kind of a handshake, and, make sure there's nothing that we missed, like a gas line or a vent or something that we might not have seen. It really never happens. We almost do that just because people are like, are we really going to do this project without ever meeting in person? It's people still kind of can't get over that hurdle. So it's
Yeah.
really just kind of a hi, how you doing handshake. And then finally we get them into our showroom so they can make their final choices.
Okay,
And then
so,
they can go ahead.
well, I'm curious, how long would you say you spend on that initial design?
So I have someone that does that design work. Typically it takes her about an hour,
Okay.
about an hour to put together a design. And then our estimate, and you know how quick it is to do an estimate and job tread. So once you have the whole thing set up, I mean, you can have the estimate done in, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes. And then it's ready to go. But again, it's not meant to be perfect. It's meant to, it's pretty detailed, but it's meant to at least give them an idea. Then
Sure.
they have an idea, budget. You can break the thing apart. You can make it bigger. You can make it smaller.
Mhm.
Just depending on what they're trying to do.
Do you ever get stuck in, this revision, cycle where it's just constant revisions and they're not, like, kinda moving forward, or
So, and our whole thing, we put in there. It doesn't happen often, but we'll give them 3 revisions.
Okay.
So that's kind of like there's a little, little thing they sign off on, but it rarely happens. And
Yeah.
typically, like, I mean, we've been pretty good at catching the red flags well ahead of time, and typically once we kind of get to that point, the final red flag kind of goes up, and it's, typically somebody that we call, like, they like to shop and think and dream. And then there's a small percentage of the people that come in, like, they don't have intention of building it. They just want to play with the designs. And it's typically those folks. Once you get to the number three, it's, we kind of cut beat just a little bit.
Sure. And so you said, though, kinda after you've given them the detailed proposal, they're comfortable, moving forward. Are you collecting a signature at that point and kinda getting that commitment, or do you bring them to the showroom, do the selections, and
It's
then
either or. We try to, like, again, I read something a while back. People have heard of the golden rule. There's a book someone wrote. They said it's the platinum rule. So you don't do unto others the way that you want to be done. You do unto others the way that they want to be done. So early in the stage, we try to figure out, like, how are they going to like it? Some people want to sign right away, and boom, that's easy. We do it right to the system, digital signature. During COVID, I was signing the projects in that second meeting.
Oh,
So I would do the first meeting and I would sell 3 projects a day. We do the second meeting and they do a digital signature and we're off to the races. After, when things kind of got back to the normal, some folks will sign right there. But I'd say it's 50-50. Some people will kind of sign off in the showroom. Sometimes they don't do it in the showroom. They want to wait a little bit longer. It kind of depends on, we have some customers that they want to have everything lined up before they start.
yep.
Every tiny thing lined up.
Yeah.
Some people don't. And that's what we try to figure out. The people that don't care, they'll sign right away. We know that they're going to be very easy to kind of go back and forth with adjustments. The folks that want to have everything lined up, they're pretty easy to pick out early in the stage, so you can kind of figure out that they're going to want everything lined up, and we take our sweet time with them, and, have them sign when they're comfortable.
Sure. So bringing them into the showroom. So tell us a little bit about your showroom. Again, a lot of times people debate, should we get a showroom? Is it worth it? Like, how does that affect the sale? I've heard people say, like, that's like the absolute game changer for them. Like, they get them into that showroom as fast as possible. Like, what's the
I mean,
background on yours?
so our showroom now is only 2 years old, and I would say it's an absolute game changer. When I started the company a long time ago, I wanted to utilize technology, not have any employees, no offices, have everything, online. That's why we did the online meetings. My dream was just to kind of travel around, do the digital nomad thing before it was a thing. And I've done that. I've sold meetings, on surf trips in Costa Rica and Nicaragua. That was the idea, to set the company up for it to be flexible, which served us well in COVID. I mean, the world came to us when that happened. Um, the issue that, and again, so that mentality, of not wanting to have that physical base was always my hurdle of having a showroom. But our process was really good. We loved it. The online meeting, the proposal review meeting, and then an on-site meeting. But there was like a gap. There was that final, it's like, hey, we're going to do this project, like, what do we, there was that gap, and the close rate wasn't amazing. And a couple employees came and said, hey man, I think we should do a showroom. And I was, against it at first, but I've learned when the employees come and they got a really good idea, you listen to them.
Yeah.
So we did that, and I think we have missed one sale of somebody coming in. So like I said before, like
Wow.
that proposal review meeting is about 80%. They come to the showroom. I think there's one lady that still, is kind of famous there who didn't sign off. So once they get there, it's a done deal. But the thing is it gives us a little bit more credibility. Where before, we're kind of like floating around on the internet. So it gives us a little bit more credibility on that side. It helps the build because they can see everything. So they're not seeing the material for the first time when it comes to the job site. We used to try to utilize our vendors' showrooms, but trying to arrange a meeting and go there and make sure everything that we wanted was in there. Now, our online setup and estimate that we have built out in JobTread is the same thing on the showroom. So we start at the top and we go to part number one, and here are the different pieces. We go to the next piece, and it's these 3 different pieces.
Nice.
So that by the end of that meeting, they know exactly what they're getting into. They made their final choices. And like I said, the close rate really goes up.
And how big is this showroom?
It's about 2,500 square feet.
Okay.
So it's not massive. We put it outside of town a little bit to kind of save on cost. We go there by appointment. So we use HubSpot for everything. We've been using HubSpot for our marketing. So everything's automated, everything's set up with meetings and schedules. So, the whole sequence goes out for the first meeting, goes out for the second meeting, goes out for the third meeting. We don't really touch it. And it just, get a message on my calendar, meet Mrs. Smith, at the showroom, 10 o'clock on Thursday. And so we'll utilize it in that regard. We're trying to find ways now to leverage it a little bit more. Out at the IBS the last week, talking to people and saying, hey, I want to put your product in my showroom, had a lot more credence than, hey, I like your product. So from that end, again, kind of from the marketing angle, getting folks to get interested in us, that's part where we're kind of just exploring that part now. But that part I think is going to be very powerful.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Again, I continue to hear that the showroom is a huge, game changer for people. And just like, again, like you said, you're no longer just some internet contractor. It's like you have a physical location. If worst case, whatever, the fear of the homeowner is that, again, they're gonna make a deposit and then you're gonna, take their money and run. It's like, well, exactly where I'm located.
That's right.
This is the headquarters. I think that just helps comfort people and kind of gives them a little bit more, grounding in that, okay, this isn't just a fly by night. This is somebody who actually has a location that, I know where they are. I think getting to go in there and touch and feel the material too. I mean, it's that's a huge, huge thing to, if they don't like how it feels, when they're walking on it, if they figure that out the very first time that you've just installed it,
You saw the
obviously
job.
for better or for worse, like if they have that bad experience, it just makes it harder for you to, be able to correct the situation versus doing it up front.
That's right.
So I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit more about, you said kind of earlier on, and we were talking about how, again, you started off a little bit more kind of broad, just everything outdoor living in the backyard, kind of the full experience. But it sounds like recently, or at some point you decided to kind of, niche down. Can you tell us more about, kind of what led to that transition? Like, did something happen? Were you struggling, with this wider array of potential jobs, and kind of how did you decide, where to go all in?
Sure. I think a couple things in business that are super important. And number one is learning how to say no. That's something that's a big challenge. And then number two, just learning how to do certain things well, or do something very well. So when I first started, again, the guy that I worked for, he built decks, but he was also a house framer. So he'd kind of have like one house being framed and build kind of 3 decks at a time. So had the background of like building homes, or typically custom homes. He was building for pretty nice architects, or building some kind of pretty cool homes and then these kind of fancy decks. So when I started the company, we kind of did the same thing, and again, kind of starting off, trying to find work, decks were always kind of our main thing. That's what we were best at. But we would take a bathroom, we would take a basement, we would do an addition. We've done 4 or 5 additions. We would do a patio, anywhere to get work. And as we grew the company, we kind of continued to do that. And as we grew the company and you kind of start to look behind the scenes, where are we making money? What are we good at? What's causing us a lot of time? It became very obvious that like we were not good at doing basements. We were not good at doing bathrooms. Um, we were not good at doing patios. And just in the area that we live in, their bugs are so bad, decks aren't super usable except for a few times of the year. And we realized like what we're really, really good at is building screen porches. It's a nice enclosure, frame roof, and make it look like a living room. So it was really from kind of a, looking behind the scenes at where are we making money? What are we best at? What can we tell folks that we're the best at? And, be honest. And then number two, back to the marketing, is just being an authority on one thing. And back, forever, our whole goal was if somebody puts screen porch into this area, we would come up for the entire first page, not the first listing, not the second listing. Our goal was to have the whole page and some of the second. That was our entire marketing plan. So you can't do that if you're doing bathrooms and you're doing kitchens and you're doing patios, but you can kind of get it if you really hammer one thing. So it was again, real, just from the business side of what are we doing and what can we be good at? How do we make money? And then also like how can that help our marketing?
Yeah, that's very insightful. Like, really, analyzing kind of the landscape, if you will, of your local market. And it sounds like you sort of I think took a little bit different path. I mean, I got to imagine there's a lot of deck builders out there. But
Yep.
like you said, you found that this was an opportunity for you to really be the market leading, and maybe even only market specialist in these screen porches and being able to build these enclosures. I mean, great move, man. Like that's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, we're lucky in the area that we live in. Well, I say that now. Historically, we've been insulated with the federal government. So, the landscape's changing a little bit. That kind of remains to be seen. But we've been lucky that there is a good market of affluent homeowners. And there are a lot of other good builders in the area. There's a lot of good builders, but there's enough of the pie for everyone to kind of have their little piece, but to have a little bit of a bigger piece, focusing on that one piece, really helps out
Uh,
when
so,
to
so,
differentiate.
so what do you do when someone comes to you and they maybe they do want the screen, the screened in porch, but maybe they also want one of those other things that you no longer want to take on. Do you just
So anything inside, we just say no, thank you. And we used to kind of play the referral game, but we got a little, it's don't love when you give a referral and like it doesn't turn out too well. So I'm sure you've heard a lot of different people. Some people live and die by referrals. We don't like to give out referrals just because it's our name and we can't perform the way that we want to perform. So inside work, we just say, hey, look, there's a lot of good folks out here. Take a peek. Yeah, and we recommend just go on your listserv, find someone that's worked in your neighborhood specific and, get a good person. Outside stuff, we have a decent network of people that, do good work. So, patio type stuff, we have a subcontractor mason who's fantastic. We don't do it in-house. Say it's on, 25% of our projects, but we build a lot of screen porches on flagstone patios or paper patios, and they got fireplaces. So the masonry stuff we'll kind of get into a little bit. If we're building on it, we'll use our subcontractor and kind of put it all together. If it's a completely different project, there's a good friend of mine who's run a company. They're called Four Seasons Landscaping. They're great. He's somebody that I say, hey, talk to this guy. He'll take care of you.
Yeah.
And we'll pass work back and forth between each other. And work on some of these big projects that have a pool and a pool deck. But I don't want to own a pool. I don't want to have the 10 years that deals with that. So, strategically, we'll push that stuff off. As far as like we do a ton of outdoor kitchens. A lot of our porches will have, a nice little deck with an outdoor kitchen. And, we do the deck projects. But, it's most of the people, when we do build a deck, we make the plan so that they could potentially put a structure on it in the future if they want to.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times we built a deck for somebody with that in mind. And 4 years later, they call us and we put a porch on it because they used it 2 times a year.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you bring up. I mean, because I do hear a lot about how, a lot of times, people will sort of find, a couple other, companies in their area that they can refer out to. But, like you said, it's if it's something that you don't have a good relationship with with that other, contractor, and you really you can't vouch for their work and the experience that they're gonna provide, it is a risk to your reputation because, again, even at the end of the day, even though they weren't your client, they still interacted with you and your business, and, I can't tell you the number of times I hear people are like, "Man, this person left me a review, but I didn't even do the project or do the work." And it's like, well, that doesn't mean that they didn't, interact with you and that, you didn't have, that they didn't have an experience with your business. And so I think, people do need to be careful and make sure that they're very intentional about who they refer out. And I would even say, especially early on when you start doing that, you need to follow up, both with that, customer is and probably also with the contractor. Hey, how did that project go? Did something not go well? Like, if there was an issue, you being able to understand, well, why wasn't that a good fit or what happened? I think that will sort of give you a lot more insight to decide, that next time, that next opportunity, do you want to send them their way or not? And it probably is better to just sort of bow out and say, look, hey, suggest you go look online and go, find a contractor. But, it's a really good point that you bring up, James, about being very mindful about who, you do refer out because they are an extension of you if you made that referral.
That's right. And I mean, it's tough to get I mean, you have a lot of happy customers, but it's tough to get customers to go out there and just talk about how good you are. It's pretty easy to have someone go out there and make them upset and have them go talk about how bad you are.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's a lot easier to go that way. So, through the course of, 20 years, almost 20 years now, we're pretty cognizant of that and we try to avoid it at any cost.
Yeah. I'm curious, what's like the average, price of your project and kind of what's the average sort of duration of how long does it take to actually, do the build?
So right now it's right around 100,000,
Okay.
anywhere between 80 upwards of like $150,000. Typically a pretty nice room with screen systems, infrared heat, televisions, privacy walls. Some of them will have other features. We try to keep our schedule or as far as booking like 4 to 6 months out, just to give us enough time for our design process. So we, right now we're booking, I think for September timeframe, which for us is good. Clients don't like that too much. But once we explain to them, like, look, we have a month of kind of going back and forth with the plans, making sure the material looks right. We have the plans done, they're engineered, they get sent to permitting. That process takes about 2 months, if you're really trying to go back and forth. So anytime we get to like a 2 months lead time, it gets a little nerve wracking. So it's, we have about a 2 month process for that piece. Like I said, we start the project sometime between 4 and 6 weeks. And then the build time is typically about 5 or 6 weeks, for, start to finish. Almost all of our guys are in-house, like the main folks, the carpenters. We do outsource kind of niche things, and that's something I'm sure you've heard people kind of go back and forth on. I think there's pros and cons to both. For us having people in-house that we can control, make sure they're there from, 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, and are going to be responsible and, take pride in their work. That's super important to us. But, I also see that the pros of subcontractors, and you find a subcontractor with that skill set and that kind of mindset, that's golden. But we keep our core folks in-house and then kind of around the periphery, or if we get super, super busy, we'll start to sub some stuff out to bring the lead time back down.
Yeah. Well, so what's the full team look like?
So there's myself. There is Kathy Lagore, who is basically she runs the show. She's essentially the general manager. Her daughter Jamie works with us. She does accounting and also does some of our design work. We have Tim, who runs our entire marketing team. He has people under him, but they're not employees. It's stuff that we kind of that we source out. And then from the builder side, we have 13 different carpenters, that'll form about 4 teams. So we keep about 4, sometimes 5 projects going at a time. So
Okay.
not a huge team, but like we've kind of strategically kept it there. We've thought about the big ramp up and kind of going, but we've kind of kept it here for the time being and potentially look to scale further in the future.
Yeah. No, that's, I think what you said about, really keeping the core in-house, but being able to leverage subcontractors, around kind of the peripherals there and being able to, use that, when you need and when you're in a pinch or when you need to ramp up a little more. I mean, like, I think that's a great balance of getting the best of both of these worlds a lot of times people do. They struggle to decide, do I bring them in house? Do I, leverage subs? And I think there's a really healthy mix. I mean, obviously, if you start with them as a subcontractor, that gives you that opportunity to kind of, get a feel for them, work with them, understand who they are, test out their work, if you will. But then, you always have the ability to try to bring them in house if you want, to lock them in and give them those additional benefits. And I think that's a good mindset to sort of have, because it doesn't have to be, all one way or the other. It's kind
That's
of
right.
about, managing that healthy balance.
I agree. No, I agree wholeheartedly. It's worked well for us. Like I said, there's pros and cons to both, and having a little bit of both is definitely, I think, a good thing.
Yeah. So I'm curious, when you kind of look back on this team that you've built, I mean, again, from an office, kind of the back office standpoint, the design, the accounting, project management, estimating, all of that. I mean, like, how did you decide when to start bringing on those people? I imagine early in the beginning it was you wearing all those hats, and
That's
so,
right.
like, a lot of people kind of struggle to know, like, when is the right time to bring on an employee to focus on, one of those functions. How did you sort of figure out that timing?
I mean, that's tricky. Um, I mean, I wish honestly I had done it a little bit earlier. I think wearing the hats while you think you're kind of saving money and saving time, you're really just you're burning yourself out, and you're probably not being as productive as you could be. Um, early on, after doing the managing, Kathy was the first person that I brought in, who and she was brought in to do the books, basically just kind of do the books. But she's the type of person that just she loves to work, and just kind of got herself into everything and learned the entire company and just kind of kept going and going and going. And we're lucky enough to have her daughter, who's basically cut from the same cloth, join us, and she came in from the accounting, so they both kind of had accounting backgrounds. And ultimately, the first one was referred to me from my accountant. They came up to me and said, "Jamie, you need to hire this gal." And he's like, you need to hire her." I said, "Okay, you speak that highly, I'm gonna bring her in." So we were pretty lucky in that regard. And I mentioned, with Tim, I met him a long time ago when he reached out, with the videography stuff, and we had kept in touch. He basically was a, kind of a marketing subcontractor. Would just kind of piecemeal work to him up until, man, 6 years ago now. So 6 years ago, I brought him in house. He was doing video stuff for us. He was handling a lot of other stuff. I had a guy that was working for me running our HubSpot, and I called him and I said, "Hey, look, I'm not super happy with how this guy's performing. I think you would be awesome for the job. I kind of assume you don't want the job, but if you want the job, it's yours." And he was like, "I wish you had asked earlier." So he came in and kind of took over that whole marketing piece and kind of ran with it, which was super super helpful. And then from there, I mean, we've tried to leverage the technology, from out like Builder Trend is fantastic. We were with another company that was somewhat similar before, and we switched over after they got bought. And just learning those systems and just going through each piece. I mean, that would be my big advice to anyone that's getting into this. Just get the Builder Trend, go into the different sections, and learn them. It'll change your business.
Now, was Buildertrim what you were using before JobTread?
Oh my god, did I say it's the we like when we were switching over, we were using Co-Construct, and like we got switched over to Builder
Yeah.
Trend and we hated it. And then Kathy came in, she goes, "I found Job Tread and it's amazing." And she's like, "This is what I want to do. This is what I want to do." And I'm the jerk he continues to just mix up the names, because we had like actually moved over into Builder Trend, and it was a nightmare. I mean, it was like for a small company like us, it was just an absolute nightmare. We had to move us back out of it into Co-Construct, where we had kind of lived until we
Yeah.
had Job Tread, and then now we're building out that system.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's never easy to sort of feel like you're kind of being forced, into another system, and I, I've heard that same experience many times. It's I think nobody wants to be kind of forced over to something, and it can make it more challenging. But yeah, I mean, so early on though, I mean, like, how did you, or at what point did you realize like you needed some sort of a system? I mean, obviously, people kind of go at it on their own, paper, Excels, sort of doing it manually for a long time. But what led you to
Yeah.
figure out the
I think it
systems.
was one day just looking in our office, like around, we're just like, what's going, like, you got a whiteboard over here, you got, spreadsheets over here. I mean, you're just like, there's gotta be an easier way to do this.
Yeah.
And then when we went into it, the company was Co-Construct, and I think we were one of the first adopters. They're a small company, and it was very simple. It wasn't super elaborate. It was just what we needed, but it would just be one part of the business that they would work on, just like you guys. You guys are, after they got bought, I think you were way better, but you're probably, where they would have ended up, later on along the lines. They just solved problems for builders. So again, my advice would be go on the job tread and just start going through the different pieces, because you guys have spent a lot of time figuring out how to make the stuff efficient for us, and it'll change everything.
Yeah.
It'll absolutely change everything.
Back to Tim and the marketing, and I know we've spent kind of a lot of time talking about this, but I think it's such an important thing because a lot of times people don't realize or understand the importance of having that marketing and the whole the marketing automations that you talked about earlier. I mean, a lot of people come to JobTread and think we're going to be able to kind of do it all and be the marketing CRM as well as the project management and the estimating and all that, and it's like there's so much value in having those marketing automations put in place and having that lead funnel and being able to track that, because especially for you, I imagine your sales cycle is a little bit more lengthy given the size of your projects, and so like it is important that you keep dripping on them and that you keep
That's
staying
right.
front of mind and making sure that you're continually providing that education. How early on did you kind of decide to implement HubSpot and get that going?
You've been with them for a long time. Again, because with the SEO type stuff, I mean, we were doing all this stuff manually, pumping out blogs and doing the fit. It was exhausting. So we're like, where there's got to be someone out here that's going to make this thing easier. And we stumbled on HubSpot. And again, same thing, just like with JobTread, go in there and just start going through their different pieces. They educate you on how to do it, how to set up your system. And I mean, it's like, it works on its own. I mean, we don't, the brand new world coming out now, AI, which we're trying to learn about, is going to ultimately kind of take those systems that we have and kind of even make them even more efficient. But I mean, from the time that someone comes in, I mean, they're dripped all the way through with call to actions and meetings set up for all the different parts. It took a long time to set up, but we don't really do much once we enter a name into HubSpot. The
Yeah.
last 3 projects that I sold this week and last week, our initial meetings were 2001, 2002, and the other one was 2002.
Wow.
And it's just because we've stayed in front of them with newsletters, other pieces, and ultimately came back. And then that's pretty typical. A lot of times, again, I give advice to people, hey man, take a year off. Anytime someone has a new house, live in it for a year, I mean, a year goes by like that.
Yeah.
It goes by really, 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 really quick. So being able to stay in front of them is huge on the back end.
Yeah. Well, I think it was, definitely a great move, and your huge advantage to be able to have an in-house person who really, is helping to manage all of your marketing efforts, and huge bonus that he is also able to do video. I think that's kind of what I would define as one of those unicorn type people where, they've got, two kind of, very, very distinct and valuable skill sets, where they can not only sort of manage a bunch of the process and kind of, all those different people who are involved, whether they're, in-house or even, outsourced, contractors, subcontractors there, but also being able to produce and deliver that value themselves, that's tremendously helpful. And, I think too, we see a lot of times, and I'm a big proponent of, having that marketing automation system in place and then being able to connect, to JobTread, through Zapier or through kind of whatever integration means, like, that really just streamlines the whole process so that you can automate everything. And then I think one of the most valuable things that, I talk a lot about, but I don't always see people kind of go do is to close the loop. In your marketing CRM, you're running campaigns, and did they come from an ad? Was it word of mouth, referral? Kind of
Yep.
what efforts are you doing to keep nurturing them? But ultimately, what you need to do is get those final approved dollars, back into that marketing, CRM, so that what was the customer acquisition cost? What was the return on your ad spend? Like, what was, the ROI of those efforts? Like, that really helps to close that loop so that these
To
are the
make the
things that
decision.
are working, and let's go double down on those. Let's go do more of those. And so again, kind of with some zaps back the other way into the HubSpot, or whatever marketing CRM they're using. Like, that is so powerful to be able to make those connections. And I think having somebody on your team who really understands that and can set that up is so powerful. And for those of you out there who don't feel like you're in a position to be able to bring on a full-time person, like, I can't recommend enough, go
Yeah.
and find a marketing partner. Find a company that you can hire today, who can bring that expertise, and often, a whole lot cheaper than bringing on a full-time person. But, like,
Yeah.
as you've heard here today from James, like, marketing was one of the very first things that you set up, and that's just been, this funnel that has continued to play out. I mean, the fact that you had,
Yeah.
if people from the, 15 or however many years ago are still becoming customers, like, that is, like, case in point, the importance of continuing to nurture, these leads. Like, just because they say no today, or you tell them no today, doesn't mean that, tomorrow they won't be in a position, and they won't be, that next customer of yours. So it's so important.
That's right. And I mean, you can look at it, you can say, man, that sounds super expensive. You're running a program. I mean, HubSpot's not inexpensive, but you're running this program and you have a full-time employee, but I don't spend money on advertising. Like that is my advertising budget. Very, very early on, we did the magazine things and we're like, pay for this or pay for that. And like, again, we're a small company trying to leverage efficiencies. Like, my whole goal is, like, with anything we do advertising, if we make it, it needs to stay out there forever. We
Hmm.
can't spend $2,000 on an ad that disappears.
Yeah.
It's a waste of money. We can spend $2,000 on a video, on a blog, on this, that, and the other, and it's going to be out there on the internet for forever. So everything we've done is organic. We don't do any paid ads. We don't do any Google ads. Like, our advertising budget is Tim. Like that. I mean, that's it. And just building out that entire HubSpot system, and leveraging all these other different pieces. So that's the advertising budget. It's his, it's his salary plus HubSpot. And it's been very, very helpful.
Well, and I would say, I think the strategic move you made to enable you to not have to spend money on advertising is by differentiating your offering, and basically being, one of the only kind of full focused, enclosure, screen porch, like that I think really sets you apart, where now you don't have to advertise. I think for the people who, if you stay kind of just decks, or just remodels, and kind of like, you've got a much more competitive landscape, where you go search for what you offer in your area, and there's a bunch of, pages of results. That's where it might be, even more important to make sure that, you're getting to the top of that page. Again, I also agree with you. Like, you got to, invest in the content, and continuing to put out content, whether it's on a blog, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's just continuing to add, pages, uploading videos and photos of all of your work. I mean, feed that Google business profile. Like, what a
That's right.
great, phenomenal free resource that people just don't do as much
Yep.
as they should. That's so, so important. I, I'm curious, how have you leveraged social, though? Maybe talk a little bit more about, Facebook and Instagram. What sort of investment have you made, being active over there?
So that's my biggest mistake. Honestly, like 5, 6 years ago, I didn't quite. I don't think I got it. I didn't see a huge. So we did it, but we just kind of did it to do it. We had built out our website so much that we're just kind of lucky to have just leads flying in. It got to the point where, I mean, it was just coming in so much because of how much we had done over a decade. And we kind of rested on our laurels a little bit. It's kind of like, this is too easy. The phone just rings. So we're a little bit late to the social game. We've had the accounts forever, and that's been our big focus. Now, before, I'm old enough to remember when, like, the cell phones took over the computers. When I first started the marketing, it was, expert. I remember them saying, like, 5 years from now, all the ads are going to be on mobile. You got to be ready for mobile. And now we're past that time of the socials, past search. And search is about to get completely jacked up with AI search. So we're really, well, I mean, that's what I spend the majority of my time doing now, is trying to figure out kind of what's going to be going on with the AI search. And then also really kind of getting into the social. So now, I mean, we outsource some of that stuff. Tim handles a lot of it, and it's actually something that I've done to start to get back, kind of back engaged and back out to the job sites. Just because I've don't make it out to the job sites as much as I would like to. Now I'm making it a point, and that's kind of becoming my role in the company, is to go out there and start to pull these, videos and start to give a little bit more of insight into what it looks like kind of day to day on a
Yeah.
design builder's job.
I think you do bring up a good point. I mean, social hasn't always had the influence and the power that it does today, and I think that's one of those things that again, you've been doing this for so long that it didn't necessarily move the needle for you early on. The thing that I've learned too is that, like, it's very important to have, kind of really understand the difference between, leveraging a personal Facebook account and building the kind of the personal brand, if you will, versus the company brand. We can go and post the same exact thing on my Facebook versus the Job Treads Facebook, and some of these things I'll get like hundreds of likes, comments, engagements, and then over on the company, profile, maybe, 10, 20, 30, like it's just like crazy, the difference. But I think the important thing to understand about social is that, where people are going to use it is really kind of, they're looking for that social proof. They may have already found you, they may already be looking at you, and then they click and they go look at your social because they want to see your work. They want to see, how active is this company. If they go and they see an empty, social page or something that hadn't been posted on in 5 years, they're going to think, man, this company might not even be in business anymore. And so I think it's about just thinking about, you're chronicling the story of your company and the work and the things that you've done. And so, to the extent that, like, you can just, anytime you're posting on, your Google business review or your Google business page, or just anytime you're collecting, photos and getting reviews and testimonials, like, you've already got the content. You're just, doubling down on it by posting it, on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok and Twitter, kind of all these different avenues. Like, I think it's just so important to kind of build that into your day-to-day process to make sure that you're maximizing the value of that content. And, I'm also a big believer, the Facebook groups, the next door groups, like being active and involved in theirs is such a great way. That's where people go when they're like, hey, I need a recommendation for someone, or I'm looking at this type of project. That's where you get like the real time. I don't think people necessarily go search, just their general Facebook, feed, because obviously they don't know who these
Greater
people
than
are and
list
these
or
contractors, or they would have already had that relationship. So it's really about, I think, getting involved in those groups and being as active as you can there.
yeah.
And I think for us, I mean, until this year, we didn't spend a dime on advertising or anything. Like, our entire growth, to over 5,400 customers has been inbound, organic, people just word of mouth, people finding out about us, from Facebook, from, these social sites, from, the reviews. And so, like, I think it's so important that, people do invest their time, in that. And ultimately that, like, that it creates this presence for you, both on your personal side. And I go and I friend as many possible clients as I can. Now Facebook won't, like, like maybe every like 5 friend requests, because I just friend the people who go to request to join our Job Trade Pros group. Like probably 1 out of 5 they let me do. It's like, you don't know this person. It's like, well, I do. They're a customer, but fine. But I think that's really helped to build up that following. And people need to think about their, creating their personal brand, in addition to the company brand, because again, it's all about maximizing that reach. So, I think social's huge. I'm a big proponent, and it's free. It's absolutely free. So
I mean, I think a lot of it too is like, I mean, look at everyone can look right now how much time they've spent on their screen, and a lot of it's on that social. So that's where people are spending just time. And if you're not constantly going, the rule of 27 and branding, like if you're not constantly going, they're not going to think of you to put it into the search. So like it's, to me, it's also just being top of mind. It's more branding. It's not super advertising. It's just being top of mind so that when come home for dinner and say, hey, let's build a screen porch. What do you think? Oh, I saw a pretty cool ad by Design Builders. Let's check them out. Then they go to the search. So that's my thought, and that's kind of the way that I've seen it. I've seen it playing out, and I'm watching other companies how they've leveraged it.
Mhm.
For all the reasons for you as well. Or if they find you on search, all right, let's find a little bit more about this company. Go into the social, and it gives them a little bit more credibility.
Too, I think there's, there is a lot of research that says, social can cause, a lot of kind of negative, feelings and reactions and kind of, even lead to depression, especially in young people. But like, I think at the end of the day, if you realize like that's entirely in your control with the people that you friend and the people that you follow, like you're building your own, your own content stream.
Yeah.
And, if I didn't have job tread and wasn't following all these, construction people, like, yeah, like I'm sure, my friends from high school and college and who knows what, wherever else in my life, like, yeah, there's a ton of kind of things that aren't like a positive influence in your life that you might not just want to see every day. But like when you go and you kind of really, curate your friend list and the people you follow, like go find those people in your market or in your industry, like who are the influencers, who are the brands, the companies, that are doing great things, like every product that you build, or that you use to build, like go follow those companies, go keep up with the things that they're doing. Like this can be such a great education source for you and a way
100%.
to keep up with new and innovative things coming out. And again, like when you start to kind of follow along with these things, like you get so much more value out of it as a tool. And again, it's free. I don't spend my day on there. I mean, I usually, in the morning and, maybe, kind of here and there, but like, in the evenings, it's not like you got to like, let it, get in the way of getting your work done, but it is a great tool. So I do encourage people to really think, a little bit more about how they're using it and how they can, really embrace it and see how it can add value to, to the business. Cause there's so many, really great nuggets out there that you just got to sort of follow along, and Facebook will get really good at. And I feel like it's super dialed in for me. It knows what I want to see because
It's
it knows
wild.
what I'm going to engage in. And so like, it's just like this, you gotta use it for a while. But man, I can go post out on there. I can go respond in a Facebook group, and we'll just like instantly have people sign up for job tread or schedule demos. And so like I can tell you, if you go join the right groups and you start to engage with the things that that are going to ultimately lead to finding the right prospects and the right people and driving them to you, it can be such a great tool. And eventually it'll get better and better with the algorithm once it really knows you and what you care about.
That's right.
Awesome, man. Well, look, it sounds like you have, you've really made a lot of the right moves early on. It's been awesome to see your success and how you've been able to build this. And again, it's a reminder that like success doesn't just happen overnight. It is a lot of hard work. It is a grind. You're gonna start off doing everything yourself, wearing all the hats. Just like you said, at times you wish you would have sort of maybe taken one or two of those hats off earlier to bring on, some people to help you, to build out your team. Like you don't have to go at this alone, but again, it's been really awesome to see how you've been able to build, such a great company and how you've really focused it, down on what you want to be really great at. It's very hard to be great at a lot of things, so find that one thing, that you can be awesome at, you can be the market leader, you can dominate, and just double down on that, do that. You've done a great job of that, James. I'm curious, though, kind of in wrapping up, like, if you had to think back, from, way early on from the beginning of when you started this, like, what advice would you give to others who are earlier on in their, in their journey, starting their businesses? Is there anything that like, you wish you would have known back then that now that like you think might have, changed the trajectory of your business? It could have helped you get up that curve quicker, or maybe, skip over a few of those hard knocks that you took along the way.
I mean, I think something that when I first started the company, and frankly, I would recommend this. I was part of a group called Vistage, where it was basically a bunch of business owners got together once a month. You had a chair, and to me, I looked at it as an MBA, and it was also therapy. So we would both learn, and we would both talk about the stuff that was driving us crazy. So I don't do that currently, but I did it for more than 10 years, and it was invaluable. And every day I say I'm going to go back and do it. One day I will, just because it's fantastic. And so that's number one. And my chair, who was absolutely fantastic, he had a saying that was, fire fast and hire slow. And that's, I mean, if you're a small business, you're trying to, if you don't have somebody that has your best interest, they're not producing for you. You're not going to change the world. You're not going to change people. Unfortunately, we think we can. Make sure you have people that are going to be high performers. And then on the flip side, hire slow, make sure you have somebody that's good. And do it sooner than you think. Like you need help, make that hire, go through the process early on. You might have to go through a few, and try it out, but but take that leap of faith, get out there, hire someone, and kind of get out of the fields as soon as you can, and things will start to take off from there, even though it looks like it's going to be a massive expense and an undertaking.
Yeah, that's great advice all around. I mean, the team you build is ultimately, that is the thing that will determine your success and how quickly you get there and how enjoyable of a journey this is. Surround yourself by really smart, hardworking, passionate people who are better than you and can take on those tasks that you're not best suited for. You can't do it all. You got to build a team, and that team is what will make or break your company. So, I wholeheartedly agree. Take the time to find the right people. Don't just put any warm body, and don't put the first person that comes along into that seat. Make sure it's the right person that you put into that seat. And look, at the end of the day, if somebody is not a good fit for the team, I think it's quite possibly the hardest, job of any business owner is to let somebody go. But ultimately, the buck stops with you. You cannot let one bad apple spoil the entire bunch. You have to, make that tough call, to remove those people. And again, it's so important. And I also very much agree with you. Find that group. Those coaching groups, networking groups. Like, again, you don't have to go at this alone. Like, you can leverage the experience from everyone else who's been there in your shoes, who's
Yep.
gone before you, who's going through it right now. It often can feel very lonely at the top, and I encourage everyone. There's a ton of these groups out there. Find the one that's right for you. You need to interview a lot of the leaders, talk to their members, really make sure it's the right group. They're doing similar things, going through similar, processes, and working in similar, arenas as you. But like, once you find that tribe, it is so helpful. And I tell you, every day I see the trajectory of these businesses. When they join that group, it just shoots up, and it's so valuable. So I think that's really great advice, James. Again, I want to thank you for coming on, taking the time here to share your story and your experience. Really appreciate it. And I'm glad to have you here with us at Job Tread. Can't wait to see what the future holds for you, man.
Thank you. It's been a blast.
Awesome. Thanks, man. See you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Builder Stories. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and gained valuable insights that can help you in your journey along the way. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave us a review. And as always, if you or someone you know has a story to share, please contact us at builderstories.com. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Eric Fortenberry, and remember, every builder has a unique story. Keep building yours.